Good evening, brothers and sisters. Shalom, shalom, shalom. Let's start again. Come on. Good evening, brothers and sisters. Shalom, shalom unto you, wherever you may be. As long as you're in Christ, you have reason to rejoice. Praise the living God. Thank you, Lord Jesus, for what you've done. Thank you for who you are. Thank you for being our exceeding great reward, the King of kings and the Lord of lords. What greater treasure could there be than him in our hearts, than the blood of Jesus Christ, as the salvation of the saints, the living God, manifest unto us, made himself known, shone his light upon our souls like a ray of sunshine in the morning, shining on a cold mountain. The frost suddenly warms. That's what it's like in the love of Christ. Praise God. My friends, I wanted to bring an update to you because with all this Ukraine war and all the theater that's going on, obviously terrible things are happening to the people of Ukraine, right? But the narrative and the puppetry, which is being orchestrated on the mainstream media, and the things that are being that are taking up mainstream media, taking up the mainstream media narrative. These things are not the things that we need to be watching very carefully. We can see that this Iranian nuclear deal, nothing is being said about it in the news, and they're just about to sign this deal. So we need to be watching the Iranian nuclear deal very closely, because that is what the important news is. So I just want to go over this article, this brilliant article, which I think the author of this article has summed it up. Melanie Phillips is her name. She's summed it up brilliantly. So I'll just zoom in on this. It says Biden's unconscionable empowerment of both Russia and Iran. You see, they distract with the left hand, and then they deceive with the right. So we need to be watching the unseen hand, and I think Melanie Phillips covers this quite well. It says U.S. President Joe Biden is now accepting Russian President Vladimir Putin, the man he calls a war criminal and who has threatened nuclear war against the West, as the controller of Iran's nuclear weapons program. In his address to U.S. Congress this week, Ukraine's President Zelensky told U.S. President Joe Biden, in a plea for American air defenses against Russian bombardment from the sky, "You are the leader of your great nation. I wish you to be the leader of the world," so Zelensky says. Congress members gave him a standing ovation, yet reports suggest that in its imminent deal with Iran, America is about to massively empower a state that is a lethal threat to the West, and already has far more American blood on its hands than has Russian President Vladimir Putin. While the Biden administration postures as standing shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine in its desperate defense against murderous aggression, it is itself reportedly about to capitulate entirely to Iran. This, astoundingly, is America's actual answer to Zelensky. Given that the Iranian regime has been at war with the West since it came into power in 1979, that its fingerprints are on almost every major terrorist atrocity against Western interests, and that it unceasingly declares its genocidal aim to exterminate Israel, the administration's determination to empower it is incomprehensible. My friends, the Bible talks about the covenant with death, making a covenant with death, because you've made a covenant with death, and the world powers, Europe, America, and China, the world powers orchestrating this deal with Iran, which has these genocidal tendencies towards Israel, is going to bring the curses of God upon the world. Okay, it goes on to say the reported terms of the deal being negotiated in Vienna will allow Iran legitimately to equip itself with a nuclear arsenal after a mere delay, according to Israel's Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, of 2.5 years. Meanwhile, through the associated sanctions relief, America will enable the regime to receive an estimated $100 billion to ramp up its regional power grab, redouble its terrorist activities and perpetrate attacks on Israel from its proxies in Syria, Lebanon, Gaza, Iraq, and Yemen. The United States is even said to be considering lifting the designation of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, that's IRGC, as a terrorist organization in return for some vague commitment by Tehran to rein it in. I mean, this is ridiculous. That is their military, given their own military, to rein their own military in. Given the IRGC's key role as Iran's elite global terrorism enforcer, any such commitment would be risible. Yet, since the Biden administration is so far crumpled in the face of every Iranian demand, can anyone believe it will allow this unconscionable condition to scupper the deal? Over the past few months, Iranian attacks on US interests have become increasingly brazen, while America's response has been no more than a feeble slap on the wrist. In response to American weakness, Iran contemptuously upped the ante in the Vienna talks, to which the Biden administration cravingly offered it more and more concessions. Unable to tolerate this surrender to terrorist blackmail, 3 of Biden's negotiators in Vienna resigned earlier this year. For America to bring Iran into the community of nations is obscene. To do so while purportedly exiling Russia from that community of nations is astonishing hypocrisy. Even worse is that the Biden administration is instructing the world to impose sanctions against Russia. His administration is actually working closely with Russia to lift sanctions against Iran. Since Iran has refused to deal directly with the United States in Vienna, the Biden administration last year asked Russia to take over leadership of those negotiations. That was bad enough, but yet worse again was to come. The announcement of the Iranian deal, which was expected more than a week ago, was reportedly delayed by Putin's demand that the United States lift its Russian sanctions over Ukraine to allow Moscow to begin trading with Iran. So Russia isn't going to agree to this deal because of the Ukrainian sanctions, and so they've delayed it. Since the Iran deal was being brokered by Russia, this threw a spanner into the works and shone a harsh light on the Biden administration's strategic and moral incoherence. Now, however, senior Western diplomats say Russia has walked back this demand. It would reportedly accept narrower guarantees ensuring that it could carry out the nuclear work, no less astonishingly mandated to do under the 25 nuclear deal. So Russia is going to be allowed to carry out the nuclear work which is taking place at which will take place in Iran. Can you believe this? That includes a uranium swap with Iran, the redesign of the Fordo nuclear facility, and the provision of nuclear fuel into Iranian reactors. And according to Adam Credo in the Washington Free Beacon, Russia's top state-controlled energy company, Rosatom, is set to cash in on a $10 billion contract to expand Tehran's Besher nuclear plant. So the United States and the world giveth with one hand and taketh with another. United States Department spokesman Ned Price said this week that America would not sanction Russian participation in nuclear projects that were part of the deal, the Iranian deal. So the Biden administration is now accepting Putin, the man who Biden himself calls a war criminal and who has threatened nuclear war against the West, as the controller of Iran's nuclear weapons program. This also enables Russia to set up sanctions evasion hub in Iran, Richard Goldberg, a former senior official in the National Security Council in the Trump administration and now an advisor with the Foundation for Defense of Democracy, told Fox talk show host Mark Levin that banks being sanctioned in Russia will be able to conduct transactions in Iran with a sanctions-free bank there. So the sanctions being applied to Russia, they can get around those sanctions by transacting with Iran's free central bank. So the transactions will be removed. This is a disaster because what the Iranians will say is, don't you dare reissue sanctions on our banks because we're letting Russia evade sanctions. If you do, we'll go back to nuclear extortions. So Iran is the way that Russia will evade sanctions. Goldberg predicted that Iran will continue to enrich uranium, keeping its enrichment capabilities that they had since the 2015 deal. That allows them to threaten the world at any time of their choosing and cross the nuclear weapons threshold. They can continue to develop longer nuclear capable missiles, and you'll know they just tested a ballistic missile very recently to attack the United States most likely Israel, and will get access to billions of dollars to fund all these malign activities. So we are setting up a deal that not only gives Iran a pathway to nuclear weapons, and we are not just giving Iran money to fund terrorism against the West, but will give Putin a get-out-of-jail-free card from all our sanctions. Of course, the immediate target is in Iran's sights is Israel. Bennett is in difficulties over Ukraine because Israel has Iranian militias on its border with Syria. Israel keeps them in check only because Putin, Syria's patron, allows Israelis to fly repeated sorties against these Iranian targets. But Israel now finds itself not just trapped between Russia and Ukraine, it's also caught between, on the one hand, an Iranian enemy actively involved in trying to murder its citizens and annihilate it altogether, and on the other, a so-called ally in Washington that is in fact hell-bent on empowering that enemy. It's not as if Iran isn't actively involved in attacks upon America itself. Last Sunday, Iran fired missiles into the vicinity of the American consulate in Erbil in Iraq. The Biden administration insisted this was not an attack on the United States, but as the Jewish Institute for National Security of America observed, the strike was exactly that, marking a massive escalation that seeks to test whether President Biden is willing to risk the collapse of this nuclear negotiations deal with Iran by responding with a deterrent force. The administration's denial, it said, would only embolden Iran still further. So as you can see, my friends, this article is excellently explaining exactly what is going on. Earlier this month, the Washington Examiner reported that at least 2 Iranians belonging to the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps' Covert Action Al-Quds Force had been plotting to assassinate former National Security Advisor John Bolton. And according to the Justice Department official with direct knowledge of the investigation, the department possessed indictable evidence against the Iranians, but the Biden administration officials were resisting publicly indicting the men for fear that this could derail the Iranian nuclear deal. So everything is happening to prevent this nuclear deal from... all indications are that Iran are making it very clear that they understand that America is weak and Biden's not going to do anything about it. And the question is, why is Biden enabling Iran, and by doing so enabling Russia as well, but also the destruction or the attempted destruction of Israel? In the Bible it says that God says that I am going to bring evil upon his nation. He's going to bring evil upon Israel. But do you think that God says, do you think I'm not going to bring evil upon you as well? So as we see this evil coming upon Israel in the form of Iran, as we see this evil which is coming upon the nation of Israel, we see that evil is coming upon the whole world. And when the destruction of Israel comes closer and closer and closer, so too does the destruction of the entire world. So we can see, my friends, we are at that time. It's all going to kick off very, very soon. It's going to kick off very, very soon. I'd be astonished if it wasn't this year. So that was the first update I wanted to bring you. The second exciting update is about the Red Heifer. Rabbi prepares for long-lost biblical ceremony. One rabbi shares his preparations for the biblical ceremony of purity through a red heifer mentioned in the book of Numbers. Also, there was an update from the Temple Institute. I'm going to put the clipping at the end of this video. Listen very, very carefully to it. They seem to be very secretive about this red heifer, and as far as I know, for the last 7 years that I've been watching in earnest about this heifer, they haven't been so secretive as they have been this year. For some reason, I encourage you to use your discernment, that you'll see that for some reason they are being very quiet about this. Now, this article that is in front of you in Israel National News seems to suggest that this red heifer is going to be ready this year. Okay, so it says Rabbi Burstein, who heads up the Institute for Medicine and Jewish Law, has been dealing with issues related to the Third Temple for many years. Despite his opposition to ascending the Temple Mount under the present circumstances, he is in favor of preparing to any possible degree for the Third Temple. Let me just zoom in on this. One such preparation that he's been pursuing for some time, along with Rabbi Ariel of the Temple Institute, is the biblically mandated red heifer. The book of Numbers specifies that the heifer must be completely red without blemish and have never pulled a yoke. The heifer would be burned and its ashes used in the ceremony of ritual purification. He says, now this is in him being quoted, Rabbi Bernstein. He says, pursuant to the efforts we have previously discussed in this regard, we attempted to ensure that there would be a red heifer ready this year. The cows were grown under optimal conditions under the careful supervision of pious farmers from the Golan Heights. Unfortunately, during the last year, black hair was discovered in them. The good news is that the hairs have returned to red within a few months, and at the same time we are now looking forward to the 2-year birthday of 3 more heifers that were and still are completely red. So we're talking about 4 heifers here, and they are going to have the 2-year birthday, which means that they've fully lived out 2 years and they're into their 3rd year. So that qualifies them. Once they've had their 2-year birthday, they're into the 3rd year. And he says, with God's help, and if there are no mishaps, now this is very key, within half a year we have 3 red heifers ready for the temple. Remember that, within half a year, because I'm going to go through the calculations of the building of the temple. The temple takes, we know exactly the number of days. The Bible tells us, if we extrapolate, if we reverse engineer the dates which are given to us, we can extrapolate the very number of days that it takes to build the temple. So he says, as someone who has heavily invested in the study of red cows over the years, must be quite riveting study that, Bernstein has discovered that there is a special organization in Scandinavia that specializes in raising red cows because their meat is more tender and flavorful than other breeds. Bernstein made use of the technology in use by the Pua Institute to freeze red cow embryos and bring them safely to Israel. So this process began some 25 years ago under exacting rabbinical guidance and is now nearing its completion. Now, this article seems to reveal a little bit more than the clipping which I'm going to put at the end of this video, but just keep that in mind. He also says that these rabbis conducted a study and examined the amounts of wood required for every kilo of red cow to obtain the correct ash for the ceremony. And he says, I hope this research will be practical very soon. So now what I want to do is go over the scriptures which tell us the very number of days that the temple will be built. Now, it's the scriptures are in Daniel chapter 12, verses 11 and 12, and Daniel chapter 8, verses 13 and 14. So that's interesting. 11 and 12, 13 and 14. So in Daniel chapter 12 it says, and from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away. Okay, so the Antichrist takes the sacrifice away. The temple is built, the sacrifice begins. There's a period of time that there is that they are sacrificing. That is the first half of the tribulation. Then the Antichrist comes in mid-tribulation. He comes in with an invading army. He conquers the land. He comes in, he kills the 2 witnesses, and he causes the sacrifice and oblation to cease. It is critical to understand that the sacrifice which takes place in the temple is legitimate sacrifice. It's legitimate sacrifice. I know there are many Christians who want to disagree with this. So be it, you'll see. The sacrifice which takes place is legitimate sacrifice. The 2 witnesses come in, they witness for 1,260 days, then they are killed by the Antichrist. The whole world sees them resurrected and they are horrified. That's in Revelation chapter 11, and then in Revelation 16, that's when the bowls of wrath are poured out. So the first date that we have, Daniel chapter 12, 11 and 12, and from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away. So from the time that the Antichrist stops the sacrifice, causes the sacrifice and the oblation to cease, and the abomination that maketh desolate set up. So the sacrifice is stopped and the abomination that makes desolate is set up. He sets himself up as the temple, in the temple of God, showing himself to be God. So Jesus tells us that he that has an ear to hear, that we must understand that the abomination of desolation is set up, that Daniel the prophet speaks about in the holy place. Jesus says it's in the holy place. Paul says he sets himself up in the temple of God, showing himself to be God. So, from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, and the abomination that maketh desolate set up. So, from mid-tribulation, there shall be 1,290 days. Blessed is he that waiteth and cometh to the 1,305 days. So, 1,290 days. That is the number of days that's the number of days that is from the mid-tribulation, the sacrifice being caused to cease, and the abomination of desolation set up. 1,290 days. And then for some reason there's an extra 40 days there. Blessed is he that comes to that. But we're going to concentrate on the 1,290 days because that's how long it says it is until the end. So 1,290 days. Then Revelation 11:3 says, and I will give power unto my 2 witnesses, and they shall prophesy 1,260 days. So we've got two periods of time here. 1,290 is the second half of tribulation. This is the Great Tribulation. 1,260 days, this is the first half of the tribulation. So the 2 witnesses are witnessing to Israel, witnessing to the world, telling the world, preaching the gospel to the world for the first half of the tribulation, not for the second half. I know some people say that the 2 witnesses come at this in mid-tribulation, and I don't understand how they reconcile that, because the 2 witnesses arrive in Revelation 11. They're killed by the Antichrist. They are resurrected, and the whole world is sending gifts to each other when they are killed. And then they're resurrected, and they say, come up hither, and that's in Revelation 11. Then you have those interceding chapters from Revelation 12 to Revelation 15. Those 3 chapters are interceding chapters. And then Revelation 16 is when the bowls of wrath are poured out on the world. Because why? Because they've called the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. They've killed the 2 witnesses, and that is when great tribulation happens. That's when the sun scorches men, and the hailstones are pummeling man, and everything in the sea dies, and all the rivers turn to blood, and everything, because the sacrifice and the oblation has been caused to cease. So we have 1,290 days plus 1,260 days. Those are the two number of days given to us in days. The second half of tribulation in Daniel 12, first half of tribulation in Revelation 11:3. Then in Daniel 8 verses 13 and 14, I think that's interesting. There's 11 and 12, Daniel 12, 11 and 12, and then Daniel 8, 13 and 14. It says, then I heard one saint speaking, and another saint said unto that certain saint which spake, how long shall be the vision concerning the daily sacrifice? So there has to be a temple, there has to be sacrifice, and the transgression of desolation. So the daily sacrifice obviously can only happen once there is a temple. A temple has to be built. So how long is the vision concerning the daily sacrifice from the moment it starts, and the transgression of desolation? So from the moment sacrifice begins and the transgression of desolation, which is mid-tribulation, to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden underfoot. So the daily sacrifice beginning, the abomination of desolation in the mid-tribulation, and the sanctuary and the host to be trodden underfoot. So all those things. So we need a temple, we need to be sacrificing, we need the abomination of desolation, and the trotting down of the sanctuary and the host, which is Israel. And that says it's going to be 2,300 days. Then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. Okay, so that's at the end. That's at the end. So it's telling you from the moment sacrifice begins until the sanctuary is cleansed, obviously including the abomination of desolation and mid-tribulation set up, 2,300 days. Now we make the calculation. Okay, the calculation, the temple build duration is the 2 witnesses witness for 1,260 days. Then at mid-tribulation they are killed by the Antichrist, in Revelation chapter 11. They have to witness to Israel, tell Israel that they've made the mistake again, they've missed the Messiah again. The first half of the tribulation allows Israel to read the gospel, to study the gospel. Anyone who wants to tell you that Israel don't believe in the Messiah until mid-tribulation doesn't give them an opportunity to read the gospel, because at mid-tribulation, that's when Israel is being chased out. That's when they get out of there. When the Antichrist comes in, then she's chased into the wilderness. So the two witnesses, as soon as we go up, they are coming down to break the news to Israel. Then they witness for 1,260 days until the Antichrist invades at mid-tribulation. They are killed by the Antichrist. That's at Revelation 11. Okay, the Antichrist then takes the daily sacrifice away, and the abomination of desolation is set up for 1,260 days. So adding those together, 1,260 days from Revelation 11, that's the beginning. That's from the beginning of the tribulation until mid-tribulation. That is the witness work of the two witnesses. That is their ministry for 1,260 days, or 3.5 years, plus the 1,290 days, which is the daily sacrifice taken away and the abomination of desolation is set up, comes up to 2,550 days. So 2,550 days, the beginning, the first half of tribulation plus the second half, deducting the 2,300 days from the moment the sacrifice is set up, from the beginning of sacrifice, plus the abomination of desolation until the end. So until the cleansing of the temple. Okay, so let's put you until the cleansing of the sanctuary, it says. And so the cleansing of the sanctuary is 250 days. So we know that it's going to take 250 days to build the temple, because this is from the beginning of sacrifice. You cannot have the sacrifice without the temple. So from the beginning of the sacrifice, that is, so the temple's ready and the sacrifice begins from that moment until the end, including the abomination of desolation, is 2,300 days. So we deduct 2,300 from the total of the beginning of tribulation plus the second half, and we come up with 250 days. And that is 250 days, and that 250 days is 8 months. That's how long it's going to take them to build the temple. Why am I telling you this? Because they are saying that the heifer is going to be ready within 6 months. So if they are saying today that the heifer is going to be ready within 6 months, that means that the heifer will be ready before the actual temple is completed. And that's perfect. That is going to be perfect timing. You know, God's going to time. He's the God of the last hour, right? So he's going to time this perfectly. It's not going to be, oh, the red heifer's ready, now the rapture of the church happens. No. It's going to be the rapture of the church happens, and they are building the temple in Israel in such a panic, because that's what's going to happen. They're going. I firmly believe that they're going to rid Israel of the Edomites. Read Obadiah. Read the book of Obadiah, and there is a genocide that's in there. There's a genocide. They're going to wipe them out, and that's why the whole world comes against Israel, because they're going to get very, very religious. They're going very Torah. So 250 days is the number of days. We even know the number of days. The Bible tells us the number of days. If we just extrapolate this, that it takes them to build the temple. So the red heifer, the secretiveness around the red heifer, what they are saying this year is unique. It hasn't been said before. Okay, Jesus says he does nothing in secret, but we can discern and we can understand these things because we've been watching. We know what they've been doing and how outspoken they have been about this in the past. We know we've been watching the Temple Institute. We've been watching the Red Heifer updates. Now, why are they being suddenly so secretive about this? Why are they being so quiet about this, right? So I'm telling you, my friends, I'm going to be amazed. I'm going to be absolutely amazed if the rapture of the church doesn't happen this year. Look, I mean, I believe it's going to been happening for a long time, but if they are saying that red heifer is going to be ready within 6 months, I'm of the opinion that it's more likely that the red heifer is going to be ready just on time. It's not going to be a red heifer in like 6 to 12 months. No. The red heifer is going to be ready at the very moment that it is sacrificed for the ashes to cleanse the temple. So this is what I wanted to show you, the calculation of the temple build duration, and I will add the update from the Temple Institute and the red heifer, and you have a listen carefully to what he's saying, and consider the article, which I'll put in the description of the video, and you make a judgment for yourself. My friends, I love you very much. Please pray for the lost of London to come to the Lord tomorrow as I go preach the gospel in Oxford Circus. Keep looking up, keep looking towards the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. I know it's painful waiting, but it's exciting stuff. And hopefully this will be our year, my friends. I'm praying, I'm always praying that the Lord comes as quickly as possible, but or in his perfect timing.
Our last update was more than half a year ago, and it was actually an update of a disappointment. We had a couple of candidates, and they proved to be no longer qualified to be the red heifer. So we have an update, which I'm very excited to share with you, but I'm going to have to leave it shrouded in mystery. Yes, we are working very diligently now on many fronts, and I can say it's an international effort. And we presently have a number of candidates. That is, again, young heifers that are currently fill all the qualifications of a red heifer. As I mentioned before, never having been worked and having no mumim, no scars or injuries, and having completely red hair, and also even the skin around their noses should be reddish, and their hooves should have a reddish tinge to them. And so, like I said, we have currently a small number of candidates, and we are being very, very discreet about it because, until you have a red heifer, you don't. So, the less said is better. And we don't want to get people's expectations too high. And also because, as it seems to be the nature of humanity, every time we make great leaps forward in trying to fulfill God's plan, trying to fulfill the commandments, trying to push forward the period that we're in, which is the Messianic era, where things are progressing. Every time you push forward, there's always a pushback. There are those that, talking about people now, who don't like to see the progress and are threatened by it for whatever reasons, and can try to place obstacles in our path. So we're being very, very discreet. We will, in the near future, have more concrete information to share with you, and even some pictures and video footage, I imagine, again, in the near future. But right now we're in a very critical moment in our preparations, and again, we're just being extremely discreet. There are a number of ranchers who are also part of our current secret. They're working with us, and it's very exciting. in a meeting today with one of the real movers of the project, and he was very excited about it and had a lot to share with me, and I'm sure a lot that he didn't share with me. But I just not currently at liberty to say any more. So I guess you'll have to trust me that things are happening. Very big things are happening. Exciting things are happening, and hopefully soon we'll be able to give you, like I said, more information about the red heifer, the current state of the red heifer, and yes, if we are able to raise a red heifer that is not disqualified and prepare it and make the ashes, then we will be in a whole new era, a whole new world. It's a whole new ball game when Israel has the ability to become purified, because as it stands now, nobody is tahor, which is the Hebrew word for pure. Nobody is tahor in terms of this particular type of impurity. And so even the Kohanim, even the temple priests that were teaching how to conduct the service in the Holy Temple, even they couldn't enter into the areas of the temple, even if we were to build a temple tomorrow. So it's crucial that we do produce a red heifer